It's another week and it's another midweek message. Here we are, and I'm in my basement, and I have had such a morning already, a day. I mean, it's 10:20 and so much has happened, and I realized that as I'm sitting here in the basement doing some office administration work, the church administrator, Carla Ferry, is on vacation. The associate pastor of the church that I'm at here at Line Lexington, Gary Palmer, is out on medical leave right now due to some medical things going on. And here I am running and doing things I normally don't do on a Wednesday morning. Yet at the same time, I made space for a friend and I to go out on the water and kayak, and for another friend to grab some coffee this morning. And now I'm sitting here in the basement, and I'm starting to have flashbacks to when I used to sit down here and when midweek messages first started, and when I had to preach online every Sunday and sit in this chair and have these life-changing experiences. And here, a year and a half later, or actually, a little more than a year. Yeah, about a year and a half, I guess. I'm sitting here again in my basement reflecting. But today it was different, right? I mean, I'm not in my basement and looking at where everything went over this past year, but I'm in my basement listening to a gentleman talk about how he's been out in the world. They started a coffee shop and brew pub in Fort Worth, Texas, and how this man is trying to be Jesus out in the marketplace. I'm reading from our midweek message, The Pastor's Pick, written by Galen Gingrich, talking about the outsider and how he was brought in. This morning, I'm talking with my friend out on the kayaks about how the church can be more effective. I'm having coffee with a friend and talking about how he's looking to be a leadership coach and be more effective. Last night, I'm in an administrative council meeting or administrative team meeting for Line Lexington, and we're talking about how the church can be more effective. All these things about being more effective, getting out, making effects on the world. Last night, I'm listening to a podcast on the ride home, and it's talking about all the changes and the shifts that have gone on over this past year and a half in our culture. We live in a culture that operates on a well curve instead of a bell curve, where polarization is very common now, that there's either a black or a white to an issue, a left or a right to an issue, a yes or a no to an issue. And we've created these polarizations instead of figuring out how to have that bell curve where there's outliers, but the outliers are not the norm. Now, when you think about that for a moment, a society that used to operate off of a bell curve, that means that there were some things that we had common. Our culture was very common. Talking about church and being a part of church is very common. And it's interesting because that's very different. That's not, that bell curve and things that we considered average are not considered average anymore. Matter of fact, what's even more interesting about this is the gentleman that was speaking about Fort Worth, Texas, is that 80% of the people in Fort Worth, Texas do not go to church. And I was listening to that. I was listening to this podcast last night, and they're talking about how in our culture, that it takes longer for someone to engage with God than it did 20 years ago just because of the amount of junk that keeps coming into our world. So I started asking this deeper question, and I was looking as I was working on the midweek message to be emailed out, that Galen Gingrich's Outsider article, I'm not going to ruin it for you so you can read it, and it's on the website, llmc.org. But Mark 16:15, he put as the verse at the end, and he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." I started asking myself this morning after I read that, what does that really mean to me practically in my daily life? In a world that the gospel message doesn't really exist. I mean, the average human being, they might know about Jesus or this, but to really understand this walking with, even in our faith formation class on Sunday morning, talking about this attitude of walking with God versus trying to appease God so I get good things, like a transactional lifestyle of religion, asking this question, what does it actually practically mean? I mean, I've heard these verses time and time again, Mark 16:15, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. We hear that word preach, and I think a lot of us think, oh, I'm not a preacher. I'm not going to stand out there and talk to people about the gospel. And I wonder if preaching the gospel means in this teaching fashion of having a posture in our life that we are transparent with others around us. Think about this more. How do you learn? How do you learn about things? You have to be shown it. You have to be taught it. You know, you just don't magically pick up some tools and magically build something. You learn it. You might watch something on YouTube. You might read a book. You might go to classes, or you've been instructed by someone walking along with you. But what I've noticed is that the preaching of the gospel comes through everyday living. It comes from being available to help your neighbor fix something, to have a relationship with your neighbor that they even want to invite you over to fix something, right? Like, I keep thinking back over my life, and I've been looking and asking God this morning, where have I seen you, Lord, really show up in this preaching the gospel to all creation? And I realized that it's been in this everyday stuff. I was talking with Alicia, our children's ministry gal, and we were even talking like, you know, people that come to church on a Sunday morning, they already believe in God. Even if they're wrestling with the concept of God, they're still probably believing in God because they've shown up at church. But there's so many people in our spaces that they might think that God's awesome, or they're trying to chase after God, but they've been burned by the church. They've been burned through some painful relationships. They've been through hurt. And trust me, I've been there. Oh, dear Lord, the list of church hurt that I have that God has healed me to keep going in this space is huge. Now you might be asking, where am I going with all this? This is what I want to process. I'll say it this way. This is what I would love for you to process this morning. Because when I do midweek messages, I really try to make sure they come from the heart. I really try to make sure it's not this orated, figure out thing out, but I want to just, like, if we were having a conversation, and maybe it's a conversation starter. But this morning, as I sat here and asking this question, I realized that preaching the gospel is living out a life that is evident of Christ in it. That the Holy Spirit is part of my everyday walk. That when I pray, I can say that I prayed for something and I watched God move. That when I talk with people, that I can see that their life, that I'm caring about they're caring about their space. I'm being present with them, right? Like I'm asking the question, do we take time to actually give a rip about the gospel in our relationships? Or are we expecting God just to do some magic bullying and make someone follow Jesus? In a world that is polarized, truth is the only thing that will gather people together. Nobody is polarized about gravity. The apple goes up, the apple comes down. The apple's in the tree, it falls to the ground. And truth is evidential. I believe that we need to stop preaching with our mouths and start walking in our relationships. Jesus had this ability to teach disciples in the everyday actions. He didn't have discipleship class. He didn't have here's my 15 steps on you to be the most effective disciple ever known to man. No. He walked with those disciples for 3 years. He walked with them. He gave up 3 years of his time, effort, energy, every day of his being, waking up with the disciples, eating meals. 3 years of intensity in relationship. I don't even know what that looks like per se, because like even my own kids, I go off to work. I'm not with them every day. I take a trip here or there. We see Jesus with these disciples regularly. Now, granted, he sends them out. They come back. So when he sends them out, now they're going out, but they're going out to actually do the work, and they come back with the reports. See, when he says, go in the whole world and preach the gospel to all creation, I'm wondering if some days we need to have more of a posture that God is with me right now. Can we actually say that we act like that? I miss the mark some days. Some days I'm really on, right? Like today, I was seeing God everywhere. And I was very awakened to it. But why? I started out my morning on the water in a kayak. I didn't start my morning with a bunch of noise. I started my morning in the quiet, in the calm. I was focused. I had a moment this morning with the Lord. I was focused. And I'm looking down through these pieces and I'm like, yes, this is how it works. Step by step, moment by moment. So this week, go and preach the gospel. Check out The Outsider, written by Galen Gingrich. Great piece on how to connect with people. It'll be on our website at lmc.org. I'll put a link down below too. But really, folks, I just want you to have these moments with God. If you've got questions, if you're wanting, drop a line, sroth@lmc.org. Drop some comments down below about how you're feeling about preaching the gospel to all creation. Love to hear from you. Looking forward to engaging more, and have an awesome rest of your week.